The light in the laundry room was soft, golden, just beginning to slip behind the fence outside. I bent down and lifted the lid of the cedar chest like I had done 100 times before. My fingers expected the gentle brush of familiar fabric. The quilt, but it wasn't there. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd opened the wrong chest, though I knew better. Instead, 3 gray plastic bins stared up at me. No label, no explanation. Just cold, impersonal lids that smelled faintly of rubber. And something else. Lavender, maybe, but not the kind Mama used. This was sharper, synthetic, too clean. It didn't belong here. My hand hovered just above one of the lids. I didn't want to touch it. Touching it would mean the quilt was really gone. And I wasn't ready to accept that. I'd stitched that quilt through chemo, one square at a time. Some days, my fingers were so stiff I had to hold the needle with both hands. Other days, I cried into the fabric. Every piece came from something real. Charles's shirt, Daniel's first onesie, a square of Mama's apron. Each stitch was a prayer, each knot a plea. I told myself if I finish this, I'll be okay, and I did finish it. I'd folded it gently and placed it right here, in this chest. My chest. And now, I placed my hand on one of the bins. It was smooth, hard, unfamiliar, like pressing my hand against someone else's life. Someone who didn't know me, someone who didn't care. The washer hummed behind me, rhythmic and dull. The smell of old cedar tried to rise, but it couldn't compete with the harsh scent of dryer sheets. It felt like even the air had forgotten me. I didn't speak, didn't call out. I just stood there, hollowed, like something had been pulled from me, and the room was too quiet to hold the noise inside my chest. The towels were warm from the dryer. I pulled them out, one at a time, folding slowly, methodically. My hands moved on their own, left corner to right, smooth, press, stack, again. The scent of lavender filled the room, but not the kind that soothed. This was sharp, store-bought, too clean, too fake. I wanted the old smell, the one that lived. In the folds of my quilt, the one that carried cinnamon and cedar and thyme. I held a towel against my chest for a moment. Its heat seeped into my arms, but not my bones. The chill behind my ribs stayed right where it was, untouched. I kept folding. The dryer clicked off. Silence fell in a way that made me straighten up. It wasn't peace. It was a vacancy, like the quiet that comes after someone leaves a room, not before they enter it. I thought of saying something aloud, just to hear my own voice, just to make sure I hadn't gone invisible, but I didn't. I folded the last towel slowly. Each fold is a little slower than the last. The fabric softener clung to the air like perfume on someone else's coat. I pressed the edge of the towel down gently, as if I could press down the ache behind my sternum, too. The laundry basket sat beside me, half full, half empty. I couldn't tell which. I just stared at the neat stack I'd made, a tower of silence, of doing what needed to be done because it was the only thing that hadn't changed. I smoothed the top towel flat again, though it didn't need it. Maybe I was just trying to smooth something else, a feeling, a thought. A goodbye I hadn't said, my hands still, and the stillness stayed. 3 plastic bins. No note. No question. Just replacement. I stood at the edge of the laundry room, arms loose at my sides, staring at them. Gray, stackable, efficient, like someone had looked at this chest, my chest, and decided it could be better used, like my quilt, my stitches, my memories, didn't qualify. I took a slow step forward. The floor was cool under my bare feet. I noticed that for the first time. The rug was gone, probably replaced like everything else. The cold bit into my heel and stayed there. I didn't touch the bins. I didn't need to. Their message was clear. They didn't want me to remember. They wanted me to store. The air felt wrong, too sterile. No cedar, no thread, just faint plastic and a buzz from the fluorescent light overhead. It flickered once. I didn't flinch. I just breathed out slowly and realized I had been holding my breath. This was still my home, technically. But I couldn't feel it. Not with these bins. Not with my quilt gone. I looked down at my hands, dry, still. They used to be busy, making, mending, shaping things that mattered. Now they just hung there, like maybe they didn't know what to hold on to anymore. The last towel was heavier than the rest, not by weight, by memory. I held it longer than needed, folding the corners slowly, smoothing it flat again and again, as if the motion could rewrite something. Erase the moment from earlier, the bins, the missing quilt. I placed it on the stack, then reached for it again, smoothed it once more. My fingers trembled, not from age, but from something else. Something caught between sorrow and silence. The room was dim now. Dusk had settled outside the window. The sky was bruised purple. The light inside the laundry room had softened too, taking on the hush that comes before a storm or after a funeral. I looked toward the cedar chest. Its shadow stretched long across the floor. It used to be where I placed my care. Now it looked like it was guarding a secret I didn't recognize. Or maybe it was keeping mine. I picked up the towel again, pressed it, held it against my chest like it could hold something in place. Then I folded it one last time and set it down. The chest looked the same from the outside. But when I opened it, I knew. The scent was gone. The hope was gone. In its place, a faint chemical freshness clung to the inside, like someone had sprayed something meant to erase what came before. I leaned over and let my hand touch the bottom wood panel. It was cool, hollow. The kind of cold that seeps into you not through your skin, but through your name, through your story. I remembered placing the quilt inside. That day, my fingers trembled. I'd just finished the final square, the one from Mama's apron. I'd kissed it before folding it. Told myself, this will wait for me. It felt sacred, like placing a prayer somewhere safe. But now it is gone. And it wasn't just the fabric I missed, it was what it meant, what it held, what it remembered. I stared into the chest for a long time, and slowly the thought crept in. Maybe I was what had been forgotten, not the quilt. Me. The kitchen always smells like lemon polish on Sundays. Mama believed a clean surface could invite good things, so she'd wipe the counters in long, thoughtful strokes, while biscuits rose golden in the oven. Her hands moved like they remembered a song I hadn't learned yet. Flour dusted her knuckles, and the faint scent of lavender from her lotion clung to her sleeves. I'd sit near the table, chin on my arms, watching the way light spilled onto the floor in patterns that seemed to match her rhythm. We didn't talk much during those mornings, not because there was nothing to say, but because the house already spoke. The sound of butter sizzling in the pan, the creak of the floor near the sink, the quiet hum Mama made when she stirred the grits. There was a mint plant on the windowsill. I'd pinch a leaf between my fingers sometimes, just to feel its cool sharpness in the thick summer air. Mama would catch me and say, "Go on, Maggie, rub it on your wrists if you're gonna sneak it." I did, every time, and the biscuits? Lord, they tasted like kindness, soft in the middle, just a hint of salt, steam curling upward like a prayer. Mama would split one open and smear it with honey from the mason jar, then pass it to me without a word. That was her love language, no drama, just the right thing at the right moment. I didn't know then that happiness had a scent. It wasn't until years later, standing in a different kitchen with different sounds and strange jars on the shelf, that I caught a trace of lemon polish on a rag and nearly cried. Because I wasn't missing the clean counter. I was missing her, and that particular kind of Sunday that only lived in the weight of her hands, the warmth of a biscuit, and the quiet, steady way she loved us. Mornings with Charles were never grand. They were quiet, steady, a slow unfolding of routine that I didn't understand the value of until the noise of life replaced it. The kettle would start its low rumble while I was still in my robe. He always beat me to the kitchen, even on weekends. "Water's on," he'd say, tapping the counter with his knuckles like it was our little code. I'd come in barefoot, rubbing sleep from my eyes, the scent of pine drifting in through the screen door. He'd already be dressed, always mismatched socks, never once embarrassed by it. I'd ask, "You trying to start a new trend?" And he'd grin. "Well, I figured you'd notice." I always did. The kettle would whistle, soft at first, then urgent. He'd pour the water while I picked out our tea. His favorite was always something simple, black with a spoonful of honey. Mine changed with the seasons, but no matter what I chose, he'd drink half of mine too. He kissed my cheek every morning before leaving. Never missed a day. Sometimes it was rushed, lips brushing skin between steps. Other times it lingered, his hand on the back of my neck, the kiss pressed into memory. "See you soon," he'd say. "Don't forget your lunch," I'd mumble, already pouring the tea. Then came the creak of the porch swing as I watched him step off the last stair, keys jingling in his hand. The screen door slammed shut behind him, soft like a punctuation mark. I thought love would come in firecrackers and grand gestures, but I learned it sounds like a kettle whistle and the soft thud of a door that always, always opens again. The boys left their marks everywhere. There was a dent in the hallway wall from when Marcus swung his backpack too hard one Monday morning. He was late, cranky, 13. I remember because his sneakers left a scuff right beneath it that never came off. Daniel once spilled an entire jar of glitter in the living room. It was December, and we were trying to make cards for their teachers. I vacuumed 3 times, but years later, I'd still find flecks of sparkle in the carpet. Even grief couldn't hide all the glitter. The doorframe in the kitchen had 2 sets of pencil marks, each with a name and a date. Every birthday, I'd make them stand straight, heels against the wall. "No tiptoes," I'd say. "Let's see how tall you really are." They'd giggle, swat at each other, and argue over who was taller. They took pride in growing, proof they were getting somewhere. The house remembered all of it. In the baseboard they tripped over, the bookshelf they leaned against while pretending to read, the faint crayon mark that never quite came off the closet door. Even now, when I run my hand along the banister, I feel the echo of them sliding down it, socks on, laughter trailing behind like smoke. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for the chipped mug Daniel gave me for Mother's Day. The handle's gone now, but I can't throw it out. It still smells like cocoa and Sunday cartoons. I walk through the house and it's quieter now. But the walls, they still whisper. They say, "This is where they grew. This is where you loved." And somehow, even in their absence, the house remembers them better than I do. I started the quilt during chemo. Not because I needed another project, but because I needed something I could finish. Each patch had a story. There was a square from Daniel's baby blanket, still soft and blue. A piece of Charles's work shirt, gray, worn thin at the elbows. One small floral strip from Mama's apron, frayed at the edges, and a bit of Marcus's old soccer jersey that he insisted was too uncool to keep. I stitched in the evenings, mostly, when the clock wouldn't move and the nausea had passed. Charles would sit across from me, reading or just watching the fire, his silence steady like a second heartbeat. Some nights I cried into the fabric. Some nights I didn't stitch at all. I just held the quilt in my lap, ran my fingers along the seams like a map I was trying to memorize. It took 2 winters and 1 stubborn spring, but I finished it, and when it was done, I wrapped it around my shoulders and sat by the window. The snow outside was falling like sifted sugar, and inside, everything felt a little warmer. That quilt became more than cloth. It was the only thing that stayed soft when life went hard. I folded it with care, tucked it into the cedar chest like a prayer sealed in cotton. A piece of every person I loved lived inside it, and that meant a piece of me could never be forgotten. The silence after Charles passed was different. It wasn't empty. It was full of things that used to be spoken. I'd sit in his old shirt sometimes, buttoned all the way up even though it didn't fit quite right. It still smelled like his aftershave. Faint, like it was trying. Not to be forgotten. I'd sit near the quilt, tracing the seams with my finger. Still here, I'd whisper. Still holding. Some nights the fire would crackle, and I'd swear I heard his voice in the pop of the wood. Not words, just presence. The silence didn't scare me anymore. It wore his shape, and I let it stay. The sun was still warm on my shoulders when I stepped inside. I had dirt under my nails, a bit of rosemary tucked into my pocket. That scent, earthy, sharp, real, was still clinging to my skin. It was a good kind of tired, the kind you earn with your hands. I was humming, without realizing it. Something Mama used to hum while shelling peas. But the tune stopped the moment I turned the corner. She was there, in the hallway, label maker in hand. Boxes open. Things spread out like puzzle pieces I hadn't agreed to take apart. She didn't look up, didn't pause, just kept printing those, little tags with that same tight expression. "Hi," I offered quietly. "Oh, hey," she replied, her eyes still fixed on the pile in front of her. "We're just organizing a bit. Marcus said the hall closet was a mess." My mouth went dry. I looked past her to the half-emptied shelves, winter scarves, my church bag, the box of extra candles I kept for power outages, all pulled out and stacked like clearance items. A mess? That closet held 30 years of Sundays. I didn't answer. I just nodded, though I'm not sure why. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe I didn't want to make it a moment. But it already was. She clicked the label maker again. The sound echoed sharp through the hallway. She didn't ask. She didn't turn. I stood there, caught between rosemary and something that suddenly smelled like intrusion. Like I'd walked into someone else's home wearing my mother's apron. I stepped back toward the kitchen without saying more. The hum inside me had gone quiet, and so had the house. The hallway closet had always been a quiet comfort. It wasn't much, just a narrow space with a creaky door, but it held layers of memory most people wouldn't think to look for. I opened it gently, as if not to wake something. Empty hangers swung slightly, like they were waiting to be filled again. But my coats were gone. Charles's scarf, navy wool with the tiny snag from our trip to Asheville, missing. The shoe rack sat bare, a few dust outlines where my winter boots had stood. She said it was a mess, I whispered to no one. But it wasn't. It was my order, my rhythm, my small way of remembering who I'd been across the years. There was a coat I wore to church potlucks, a scarf Daniel got me in high school, too bright, too silly, but I wore it anyway, and now it was all somewhere else, sorted, maybe tossed. I reached out and ran my fingers along the edge of the doorframe. There was a chip there from where Charles bumped it, carrying in our old vacuum. He cursed, then laughed. I could still hear it, low and scratchy. I leaned my head against the frame and closed my eyes. Every zipper, every piece of lint, every scent in that closet had spoken in Charles's voice. And now they'd been boxed up like forgotten sweaters. I felt my heart thud in my chest. Once, then again. Like a knock I didn't know how to answer. The light in the bedroom had shifted by the time I opened the cedar chest. Late afternoon shadows spilled across the floor, cutting soft lines through the gauzy curtains. I knelt down, the same way I always did when I needed something tucked away in memory. But as soon as I lifted the lid, I knew. The quilt was gone. In its place, 3 plastic bins labeled in neat handwriting. One said seasonal, another misc. The third didn't even try to explain itself. The bins smelled wrong, like factory plastic and lavender dryer sheets. No warmth, no time in their seams, just newness. The kind that erases everything behind it. I touched one. It was cold, unapologetic. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Something heavy was pressing down on my chest, like grief without warning. The quilt had been the only thing that held it all together. Baby clothes, old shirts, patches of love stitched through years that almost broke me. Gone. I sat back on my heels. My hands rested in my lap, still. Not empty, just displaced. The silence in the room grew thick. I could hear the refrigerator humming down the hall. The air smelled like nothing I recognized. The light kept fading, and so did I. It had rained the night I stitched the last patch. A spring thunderstorm, soft and slow, tapping against the windows like it knew I needed company. I remember the dim yellow of my bedside lamp, the way it caught the needle just right. My fingers ached. The arthritis had crept in early that year. Still, I held the needle between thumb and knuckle, coaxing it through the fabric one slow breath at a time. Charles was reading in the chair by the dresser. Every now and then, he'd glance up. "You don't have to finish it tonight," he'd say. But I needed to. I needed to complete something. My body felt like it was unraveling back then, and I was afraid I wouldn't get the chance later. The final square was from Mama's apron, yellow with tiny green daisies. It smelled faintly of cinnamon even after all those washes. I pressed it into place, tied the last knot, and just stared at it. "It doesn't match," I whispered. Charles smiled without looking up. "Doesn't have to," he said. "It's stitched with love. That's what finishes it." Now, sitting in that quiet room with the quilt gone, those words returned. It didn't have to be perfect, but it had to be here, and it wasn't. He had a fever. 8 years old, cheeks flushed and eyes glossy with sleep. I'd wrapped him in the quilt, fresh from the dryer, still warm. He nestled into it like it was more than fabric. "Mama," he mumbled, voice raspy. I leaned down, brushing his hair, back with my hand. It smells like you." I don't know what it did to me then, but it broke something open. Not in a bad way. In a way that said, I mattered. That quilt cradled him when I couldn't hold him. It carried warmth where I could only offer words. Now, standing in the hallway years later, knowing it had been folded away in some box marked miscellaneous, it hurt more than I expected, not because of the fabric, because of what he used. To feel in it, because of who I used to be in his eyes, there were 3 bins. One said, seasonal. Another, office supplies. The last, miscellaneous, as if the life I'd built could be filed under leftover. I stared at that label for a long time. The handwriting was tidy. Someone had taken their time. But it didn't recognize me. It didn't see the meals I'd cooked, the birthdays I'd planned, the nights I sat up sewing with tears I didn't let fall. It didn't see the way my hands had aged, building a world that no one remembered to name. I didn't cry, but my fingers trembled as I lifted the bin just enough to see what was inside. A pair of gloves, my sewing box, a cookbook with pages stuck. Together from syrup and years, everything I loved, reduced to a generality. The light in the room was soft, the lamp casting long shadows across the floor. But nothing about this moment felt gentle. I closed the lid and whispered, "That's not what I am." The bed had been moved, just a few feet over, closer to the window. To open the space, they'd said. Better light. But I hadn't asked for better light. I hadn't asked at all. I sat down on the edge. The mattress felt unfamiliar somehow, like someone else had chosen how I should sleep now. My feet didn't quite touch the floor. That was new. I looked around the room. A different rug, a diffuser blinking softly on the nightstand. The photo of Charles and me, gone, replaced with a print of abstract shapes that meant nothing to me. I pressed my palms against the mattress, grounding myself. When did I stop being the owner of my own home? I couldn't remember the exact day, but I felt it now. I was a guest, a quiet, polite guest, and I hadn't even noticed when the invitation expired. Sunday mornings used to wake me up with me. The smell of cinnamon, nutmeg, maybe a little vanilla, would fill the kitchen before the light fully did. That scent, it wasn't just baking. It was welcome. It said, "This house is alive." Now the oven sits cold, not broken, just unused. The recipe box still rests on the shelf above it, its corners soft from years of flour-dusted fingers. See it every morning and tell myself, maybe next week. But I don't mean it. I told myself it was the summer heat. Who wants to bake when the air sticks to your skin? But it's not that. I know it isn't. It's the silence. The pans are too quiet now. The measuring cups are still there. Even the wooden spoon, my favorite one with the crack down the side, feels heavier than it used to, like it misses the sound of being needed. This morning, I reached for the sugar canister out of habit, and my hand paused. There was nothing wrong, nothing urgent, but something in my chest tugged back. And I let it. I leaned against the counter instead, looking at the empty spot where the mixing bowl used to sit every Sunday. My hands stayed folded in front of me. Not sad, just still. I heard a door shut down the hall, the faint rustle of keys, her laugh, his voice. I didn't move. Somewhere between the spice rack and the silent oven, I'd stopped being part of the ritual. Now I just watch the house go on without me. And it does. But I miss the flour. I miss the mess. I miss what it felt like to offer something warm and have someone call it home. The air smelled like lavender, but not the kind I knew. It was the store-bought kind, sharp, cold, like something trying too hard to be soft. A diffuser hummed quietly near my prayer books, pushing out tiny puffs of purple-scented steam. I hadn't placed it there. There was a yoga mat rolled up beside the cabinet where my photo albums used to sit. They'd been moved. No one said anything, but they were gone. I stared at the space for a long time. It was strange. Familiar shapes, unfamiliar voices. My rocking chair still sat in the corner, but someone had put a throw pillow on it. Bright. Orange. Geometric pattern. Not mine. I walked through the room slowly. I could hear the washing machine start up somewhere in the back. The light coming through the window was harsh, slicing across the floor in angles that made the house feel like a gallery, not a home. I used to know where everything lived. Now I wasn't sure where I belonged. I sat down in the chair. Not to rest, just to prove I could still sit there. The diffuser kept buzzing. I folded my hands in my lap, let out a slow breath. I don't remember inviting change, I whispered. But it had moved in anyway. At night, the ceiling looked like it was holding secrets. Lay on my side, the shape beside me empty. That part of the mattress still sloped slightly, where Charles used to rest, even though it had been years. Some nights, I still reached for him in my sleep. Not fully, just a twitch of fingers toward warmth. Tonight was quiet. No wind, just the soft hum of the ceiling fan overhead. Somewhere down the hall, I heard them laughing, watching a movie, I guessed. Their voices were low, cheerful. I couldn't make out the words. I turned onto my back and looked up again. The shadows were long tonight. The room didn't feel cold, but it didn't feel warm either. It felt wide, too wide. I closed my eyes, trying to recall the sound of Charles's breathing. The way his hand used to find the small of my back in the middle of the night. The way his mismatched socks always peeked out from under the blanket in winter. There's a certain weight to being alone in a bed, meant for two. A kind of emptiness that hums against your ribs. I reached for the edge of the quilt and pulled it tighter around my shoulders. It didn't help much, but it was something. Their laughter rolled down the hallway like something poured from a cup too full. It was bright, loud, carefree. I was curled on the far end of the couch, a blanket tucked over my legs. Not from the cold, but for the weight of it. I needed to feel like I was still here. The light from the living room flickered, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Their voices rose again, her laugh, his response, the sharp bark of something. Funny I hadn't been invited to. I stared at the ceiling. I knew the lines in that plaster better than I knew my own reflection lately. I wanted to say, I'm still here. But I didn't want to interrupt their joy, so I pulled the blanket higher and let the warmth press against my chest. Not comfort. Just pressure, proof I was still a body, still solid. The kitchen smelled faintly of popcorn, but none of it had passed by me. The day Mama handed me her quilt, I was 22 and barefoot on the porch. The car engine was already running. Charles was stuffing bags in the trunk. I was all nerves and perfume. Mama came out with it folded in her arms. "It's not perfect," she said, smoothing a corner, "but it knows your story." I laughed. I didn't understand. Not really, but she pressed it into my arms like it mattered, and I let it matter because it made her smile. That quilt traveled with us everywhere, moved from sofa to guest bed to cedar chest. It had the scent of her house, a faint hint of cloves and clean linen. I thought I'd always know where it was. Now I sat in a room filled with objects I didn't recognize. Crisp throw pillows, abstract wall prints, everything in its place, nothing in mine, and all I wanted was that quilt, that weight, that memory. I would have traded every pillow in that house for one square of Mama's stitching, because the quilt knew me, and not much else did anymore. I folded the blanket across my lap slowly. The lamp beside me buzzed, casting a soft yellow glow across the room. The kind of light that doesn't chase darkness away, it just makes it sit quieter. The house didn't say my name anymore, not in the drawers, not in the labels, not in the photos on the shelves. I waited for it to notice, but it didn't. There's an ache that doesn't cry out. It breathes. It hums in your elbows. It makes your knees creak differently. It asks, softly, "Are you still here?" I looked down at my hands, the ones that had raised boys, held heads during fevered nights, folded letters I never sent. They sat still now. "If I left," I whispered, "would the walls remember?" And I knew the answer before it even came. Have you ever felt that? Like the house moved on, but you stayed seated? I wonder if it's just me, or if we all disappear. Before the door ever closes, the rain had no music in it. It didn't tap softly against the glass the way it used to. It just fell, heavy, cold, endless. A curtain of gray outside the window, blurring everything I didn't feel like naming. Sat in the corner chair, a fleece blanket pulled around my shoulders. It was new, too new. It didn't smell like cedar or cinnamon or thread. Just that faint plastic store scent and maybe the stale air from the back of the closet. It didn't carry me, didn't know me. The window had fogged from my breath, a single soft oval near the bottom corner. I didn't wipe it away. It was the only warm thing in the room. The heater rumbled once, then sputtered like it had changed its mind. Outside, the bird bath overflowed. The hydrangeas had collapsed under the weight of the water, petals limp and darkening. I watched a squirrel dart under the porch eave and curl into itself. Smart thing. I envied its instinct to run from the storm. I didn't move. I didn't feel like I could. My hands rested in my lap, still as stone. The blanket slipped off one shoulder. I didn't pull it back up. The chair creaked quietly as I shifted. Not for comfort, just to remind myself I was still in it, still here. The rain kept falling, and I kept listening to it, waiting for something inside me to match its rhythm, but it never did. It just kept going. I found the stain on the edge of the sink. Red lipstick. It was faint, but it hadn't been there that morning. The imprint was curved, like it had been left in a rush, maybe a last glance in the mirror before heading out to dinner. Before laughing in a car that didn't carry me. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it while brushing my teeth. The bathroom. Light was dim, casting yellow across the counter. Rain tapped at the small window above the tub, soft, rhythmic, like it was trying to slip inside unnoticed. The toothpaste tastes sharp, too sharp. I rinsed my mouth, but the bitterness lingered. It had nothing to do with mint. I glanced at the sink again. It wasn't the color that hurt. It was the way it sat there, undisturbed, unashamed, like a signature I hadn't been asked to read. They hadn't said anything about plans that night. No mention of dinner. No, we'll be back late. Just footsteps down the hallway. AIV, car door shutting, and the stain they left behind. I opened the hall closet expecting to feel something familiar. A soft scarf. The brush of thick wool. Maybe even the leather handle of my favorite tote. Instead, I was met with wire hangers and empty air. I stood there for a long moment, my fingers still clutching the knob. The bulb overhead flickered once, then settled into a dull, humming glow. I stepped forward, letting the door creak open the rest of the way. The scent that used to live in that space, cedar, winter, a trace of Charles's old cologne, was gone. Replaced by dry air and the faint musk of cardboard. My coats were missing. My scarves, too. I crouched slightly and checked the floor. Nothing. Not even the box where I kept the snow gloves with the frayed lining. Gone. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I just gripped the edge of the door and let it rest against my palm. The closet used to hum with memory. Now it breathed nothing. I looked at the hangers swaying slightly, as if trying to remember what they once held. I wished they'd remembered me. The pantry was bright, too bright. The overhead light buzzed, and I squinted as I reached for the second shelf, out of habit. The orange Pico was gone. In its place, turmeric detox. Next to it, something called Clarity Blend. I stared at the boxes, all neat, all lined up, all wrong. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the turmeric, just to hold it, to see if maybe it would explain itself. But it didn't. It smelled like licorice and something bitter. I turned the box over. Instructions, promises, not a single mention of comfort. I stood there barefoot, the tile under my soles cold and unforgiving. A draft crept in from under the back door. I didn't move. Clarity? I laughed, just once, soft. The sound surprised me. Healing doesn't come in a box that forgets how I take my tea. I looked around the pantry. The shelves were filled with things I didn't recognize. Chia seeds, almond flour, something labeled Gut Harmony. Everything else had been tucked away. The peanut brittle I kept for birthdays. The jar of preserves I made last fall. My teacups, all gone. And in that moment I realized this wasn't my pantry anymore. The question slipped out before I meant it to. Am I invisible? It wasn't loud, just a whisper. A fragile thread of sound that felt almost too light to carry weight. But it did. It echoed back at me. The kitchen was still, the light dim, the refrigerator humming low in the corner like it was trying not to be noticed. One dish towel lay folded, wrong on the counter, not mine, not the way I'd taught the boys to do it, corners aligned, edges clean. I looked at it for a long time. I didn't reach for it. The question sat between me and the sink, between me and the table where no one sat anymore. It wasn't a plea, just an observation, but somehow it hurt more. I closed my eyes and waited for an answer that didn't come. The silence grew thicker, heavier, like it knew it was being watched. It was late. The porch light buzzed outside, flickering now and then, casting a thin glow across the hallway rug. Except it wasn't the rug I chose. It was brown. The doormat at the door had new letters on it, bold, shiny, too neat to have seen any real life yet. The Martins. I stood there, hand resting against the doorframe. Not the Holmes, not me. I looked down at my feet. Bare. Still. There was a chill coming from under the door. I curled my toes against the floor, trying to hold something solid, but my name wasn't there. Not on the tea, not on the towels, not on the shelves, not even at the front door. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being overwritten. The worst part? No one even noticed. The countertops gleamed, white, smooth, wiped down so clean they reflected the light in thin, sharp bands. The walls were painted fresh, bare, nothing on them but silence. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and felt like I'd been inserted as a question mark, not a person, not a presence, just punctuation. I looked around and saw no signs of me. No recipe card taped to the cupboard. No magnet with Daniel's childhood scribbles. No crumbs from the cinnamon toast I used to sneak before sunrise. Everything was clean, too clean. I pressed my hands to the counter. The chill bit into my palms. It didn't matter. I wasn't the homeowner anymore. I was the note in the margin. The detail someone meant to circle back to but never did. A draft. Waiting to be deleted. It was early. The house still hadn't decided to wake up yet. I was in the sewing room, sorting through a tangled mess of thread and broken needles, just trying to give my hands something to do. The sunlight spilled quietly across the table, catching on a button jar and a pair of silver scissors. And there it was, tucked underneath the sewing basket, a folded piece of paper. No envelope, no stamp. My name is written on the outside, in Marcus's old handwriting. The kind he used when he was in 4th grade and still dotted his eyes like little raindrops. I held it gently, opened it even slower. Inside was Mama's handwriting. My throat tightened. It was a recipe for peach preserves, written in her careful script, slanted just a little like her posture when she stood at the stove too long. At the bottom, in the corner, she'd added a note. For when you forget how sweet you really are. I blinked. There was a lump forming in my chest, something caught between a breath and a sob. I hadn't been looking for a reminder, but there it was. I pressed the letter to my chest, fingers still dusted with bits of thread. The scent of old paper and cotton hung in the air. I didn't cry, but I felt something stir in me, something soft and warm, like being held without arms. The moire paper crackled in my hands as I unfolded it completely. It was yellowed around the edges, thin in the creases, but the ink hadn't faded, not a bit. Mama always used the same blue pen. I could almost see her now at the kitchen table, licking the tip before writing like it gave her more control. She'd say, "Ink needs warming up, same as your words." The strokes were steady, gentle. Not a mistake anywhere. Her peach preserve. Recipe filled the page, every ingredient measured with memory. But it was the note at the bottom that held me still. It said, "Don't forget how sweet you really are, not how sweet the peaches were, not the jam." Me. I wasn't expecting it to matter as much as it did, but it did. My breath caught, not from sadness, from something warmer. Recognition. It started at the corner of my mouth, just a twitch. Barely there, but then it stayed, curled up a little, became something. A smile, my first one in weeks, maybe. The kind that didn't come out of politeness or habit. It wasn't for anyone else. There was no camera, no visitors, no one witnessed it, and I think that's what made it matter more. It was just me, the sewing table, a piece of folded paper, and this tiny warmth climbing up my face like a flower reaching through cold dirt. I didn't rush it. I let it live there for a while, because it was mine. And in a house where so many things had been taken or changed or boxed up, having something that was only mine felt like a miracle. I don't know what made me do it. I walked into the kitchen, not to cook, not to clean, just because I wanted to be near the window. The sun was slanting through it, dust motes catching in the light like they were dancing just for me. Without thinking, I pulled open the spice drawer. It was instinct, like my hand remembered before I did. And there it was, behind the turmeric. And the chai sat my old jar of cinnamon sticks. The lid was slightly rusted, the glasses cloudy, but inside, still whole. I unscrewed the lid and brought it to my nose. It hit me like a soft wind to the chest. Sweet, warm, woodsy. Familiar in a way that didn't need explanation. I closed my eyes and just breathed it in. It smelled like home, like baking at 5 a.m. before the boys woke up, like Christmas mornings and Sunday rolls and Mama's kitchen when she thought no one was watching. I felt my shoulders drop. I hadn't realized how high they'd been sitting all these weeks. That scent, it carried them. I didn't even have to close my eyes. The moment the cinnamon reached me, I could see it all. Charles peeking into the kitchen with that grin of his, pretending to steal a cookie before dinner. Daniel, cheeks pink, sugar clinging to the corner of his mouth as he licked a spoon clean. Marcus, little and loud, twirling the wooden spoon like it was a baton, spilling flour in circles across the floor. None of them are here now, but at that moment, they were. The kitchen didn't feel empty anymore. It felt layered, full. I stood still, the jar pressed gently under my nose, and let the memories walk through the room again. It wasn't the walls that I remembered. It was me. I had carried this, the scents, the sounds, the love. All of it had lived in me the whole time. I hadn't lost them. I just hadn't opened the drawer. I used to think I'd disappeared, that when they moved my chair, changed the rugs, replaced my quilt with storage bins, it meant I was gone. But standing there in the kitchen, the letter in one hand and the cinnamon in the other, I finally saw it clearly. I wasn't gone. I wasn't erased. I had just been buried. Beneath layers of noise and newness. Beneath better ways and fresh starts. Beneath everything that forgot what I had sewn into the corners of this home. My story wasn't on the walls. It was in the stitches. In the tea I brewed. In the scent of cinnamon. In the paper soft with age. I looked out the window as the curtain lifted slightly with the breeze. I wasn't lost, just hidden. And now I was beginning to return. The dust on the mantel had been there too long. I wiped it slowly with an old cloth, the kind I used to use on Sundays. The fireplace hadn't been lit in months, but I kept it clean, out of respect. Above it hung a framed quote in a shiny black frame. Be the change. I'd never liked it much. I stood there for a moment, cloth in one hand, the other resting on the stone ledge. The quote had been hers, his girlfriend's. She'd brought it in a box, labeled Living Room Aesthetic. I took it down gently. The hook gave a soft click as the frame came free. In its place, I set an older frame, wooden, slightly chipped, a photograph of Charles and me. Cloudy sky behind us, both of us laughing, me mid-squint, him with his head tilted just enough to show that crooked front tooth. I stepped back. The light from the window stretched across the hearth, and I swear, the room exhaled, like it had been holding its breath since the last time someone called it home. The scent of wood polish lingered faintly in the air. The paper backing of the photo had softened over time, like it had been waiting to be remembered. Didn't speak. I just stood in that soft, early afternoon light and felt something settle, not like defeat. But I liked to return. The cedar chest was still empty. I already knew it would be, but I lifted the lid anyway, like maybe it had changed its mind. It hadn't. So I got my keys. The breeze was warm as I drove down Bellevue Road, windows cracked just enough to let it in. The consignment shop sat quiet, its bell chime still the same as always. Alice stood behind the counter, flipping through a receipt book with her reading glasses perched low. She looked up. "Well now, I wasn't sure when you'd come. I'm here for the quilt," I said. Her face softened. "I still have it. Couldn't bear to let it go. It felt like it belonged to someone who'd come back for it." She brought it out, folded tight. My hands knew the weight before they touched it. Every stitch remembered me. "Thank you," I whispered. When I got home, I laid it across my bed, smoothing it over with both hands. The fabric caught the light and made the room feel whole again. It wasn't just cloth. It was me, rightful and returned. The bins didn't make a sound when I moved them. No lids slammed. No boxes dropped. Just the steady rhythm of motion. Open, lift, carry, stack. I started with the office supplies, then the tea, then the gray towels, the essential oils, the yoga mat, and all the mugs that didn't belong. Every drawer that didn't. Speak. My name was emptied. I wasn't angry. Not once. I moved slowly, like folding linens on a quiet Sunday. A calm kind of knowing had settled in my bones, like the voice that tells you, "This is how you take back a space." A cinnamon tea, steeped behind me in the kitchen. The scent grew stronger as the sun leaned west, pouring light through the open windows. I labeled every bin neatly. Living room, bathroom, personal items, polite, clear, unemotional. I didn't cry, I didn't mutter. I just packed, because I had decided, and I was done waiting to be seen in my own home. The sun was slipping low, brushing gold against the porch steps. The house was still, quiet, except for the hum of crickets warming up for night. I opened the front door one last time, stepped outside, and taped the note to the center of the door. It read, "The house needed fresh air." I opened the windows. "You'll find your things in the garage, wishing you clarity." That was all. No venom, no shame, just honesty. It was the same word printed on their tea. Clarity. I thought it was fitting. I stepped back, looked at it, one last time, and closed the door softly behind me. There was no thrill in it, no satisfaction, just peace, the kind you feel when something heavy finally sets itself down. The phone rang for the third time, then the fourth. I didn't reach for it. It buzzed against the counter and went silent again. Instead, I dropped a cinnamon stick into my tea and watched the swirl of warmth rise from the mug. Charles's record crackled in the corner, the one he used to hum along with while fixing the porch rail or stirring soup. The notes filled the kitchen like an old friend came to visit. I lit a candle, Mama's scent, the one I used to steal as a girl. It smelled like flour, lavender, and something clean, something safe. I wrapped the quilt around my shoulders, leaned back into the chair, and let the music drift. The phone rang again. Still I didn't reach. Not out of punishment, but because my hands were already full, with memory, with calm, with myself, and for the first time in a long while, they didn't shake. I heard the footsteps before the knock. I opened the door only halfway. Marcus stood there, phone in one hand, confusion in his eyes. "Mom, what the hell?" I held up my hand. "No yelling in my house." He froze, blinked like he didn't understand the words. "My house?" he said quietly. I nodded. "Yes." He looked past me into the entryway, the framed photo over the fireplace, the quilt folded neatly on the chair. Everything familiar, yet rearranged. Everything. Back where it belonged. I didn't mean, "I know," I said. "But meaning isn't the same as remembering." The air between us stayed quiet, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. We stood there, still. He finally asked, "So this is your house again?" I smiled. "It always was," I said. "I just forgot for a while." My voice was steady. My feet were grounded. My breath, slow. He didn't argue. He looked down at his shoes, then back up, searching for something to say. I didn't feel the silence because I wasn't trying to explain. I was remembering. Behind me, the house held steady. The soft creak of the floor, the faint scent of cinnamon in the air, the quiet hum of a record winding down. "I'll get my things," he finally said. I nodded. He turned, walked down the porch steps, and I stood there, hand still on the knob, cardigan swaying in the breeze. I didn't cry, I didn't celebrate. I just breathed in the evening and stayed. The quiet had returned. But this time, it didn't press against me like an absence. It wrapped around me like a shawl I hadn't worn in a while. Familiar, soft, just a little worn at the edges. The kind of silence that doesn't demand anything. It just lets you be. The morning light came in gently, filtered, through the sheer curtains I'd once considered replacing but never did. It painted long, pale rectangles on the floor. The old boards beneath my feet cracked a little when I walked toward the kitchen, like they were stretching awake too. No boxes, no clutter, no things that didn't belong to me, only space, only breath, the Kai. Walls didn't feel strange anymore. They felt like they remembered me, like maybe they'd been waiting too. I leaned my hand on the counter and exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like I was trying to fit myself back into something. My breath simply belonged. This was my home again, and it held me without question. The rocker sat by the window, same as always, but now the quilt was back, draped across the back like it had never left. The soft edge of one square hung down, just enough to brush the seat cushion, its faded colors warmed by the morning sun. I walked over slowly, my fingertips trailing the edge. Cotton against skin. Familiar. Grounding. No longer folded away in a cedar chest. No longer hidden behind bins and labels. Now it breathed in the room again, just like I did. I sat down, pulled the quilt across my lap, and let the light settle over. Both of us. I didn't need to explain anything. The room knew I was home, and so was it. The cedar chest looked the same from the outside. Smooth wood, brass hinges slightly dulled. But inside, it had changed. There was no ache when I opened it. Now, no jolt of loss, just the soft scent of dried paper, thread, and cinnamon. It smelled like time that had forgiven you. Inside were only a few things. The recipe. Mama's note. Some old lace, folded carefully beside a bundle of fabric scraps. I picked up the letter and read it again, even though I didn't need to. I already knew what it said, but I liked the way her handwriting still reached for me, the way her voice felt steady through the ink. For when you forget how sweet you really are. I smiled and placed it gently back beside the folded thread. This chest didn't hold grief anymore. It held memories, it held proof that I had always been here, even when the world forgot to look. My hands knew what to do. Even before I finished tying on the apron, I'd already reached for the bowl, the flour, the old wooden spoon. The kitchen was warm, soft heat from the oven, sunlight stretching across the counter like it had been invited. Measured without thinking, not because I had to, because I missed the feel of it. The small cloud of flour rose when I stirred too quickly, the soft thunk of butter hitting the bowl. The dough stuck between my fingers like something that needed me. I didn't rush, didn't worry about perfection. This wasn't for anyone else. This was for me. As the cinnamon hit the warm air, something loosened in my chest. It smelled like memory, but it also smelled like now. The timer ticked. The dough rose, and for the first time in so long, I hummed to myself while the oven worked its quiet magic. This was grace, and I could taste it already. The phone buzzed once. Then again, a message from Marcus, looking at a place on the 8th. It has a porch. You'd like it. Just that. No apology, no explanations. But somehow, it felt like enough. I picked up the phone, typed back slowly, "Make sure it gets a good morning light." Then I set it down. The breeze stirred the curtains gently. The house didn't feel empty. It just felt open. This wasn't about starting over. It was about learning how to speak again. In softer tones, shorter words, and longer love. Twilight wrapped the house in soft gold. Shadows stretched slowly across the furniture. Everything was still, not frozen, just resting. I sat in my chair, hands folded gently in my lap. I used to think silence meant being forgotten, that if no one was talking to me, I must have vanished. But now, I understood. This quiet wasn't erased. It was grace. It was space I had earned, not to disappear into, but to breathe in. I didn't need to prove myself, didn't need to announce my presence in every room. The room knew, and that was enough. I didn't slam a single door. I didn't raise my voice. Not once. I folded the towels, the quilt, the spare apron, each item tucked neatly where it belonged. Then I folded the corners of myself, the worn-out places, the stretched too thin parts, and I laid them gently back inside me. Not to hide them, to hold them, to remember what they carried. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. The last of the tea is still warm beside me. I sat in the rocker with the quilt on my lap, and I exhaled. Claiming a life doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it's just this: a quiet evening, a lamp casting soft light, and your own breath, saying, "I'm here. Thank you for sitting with me through every stitch and silence." If you're 50 or older, I'd love to know your age and where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. And if my story reminded you of something, warm or something gone, subscribe for more of Grandma's Tales.